Hi, I'm Keegan. This is GM Talks. We are joined by Jade, who is a player in the Werewolf the Apocalypse game that we currently are running, as well as running her own games online. Welcome, Jade.
Thanks for having me.
So, we were just talking a little bit. So we'll get some basics going, I guess. I know you're running werewolf, or not, sorry, not werewolf, vampire now.
Yeah, I now have my own vampire game, which gets streamed on a Wednesday on a channel that I'm part of, where we do lots of different tabletop games, 5 nights a week now. We started with one, we're now on five, and we have more to come. So we're slowly filling up our schedule. And we're having to put stuff in the back burner because we haven't got days to run things anymore.
Wow.
So on top of the one that I actually solo run on a Wednesday, I also help run another vampire game on a Friday, which is about maybe 4 episodes before they have their finale. And I also help run another werewolf game on a Saturday, where they've kind of just finished their first sort of like checkpoint, shall we say, where they've cleansed a cairn
Okay.
of Black Sparrow dancers.
Okay. That's pretty impressive. So, I know it's V5. Did you start on V5, or which version of Vampire did you start out on?
I started on V5. I've kind of had a look at the other versions, but I love V5. I think V5 is really well put together. It's really easy to follow as well, especially if you're brand new to World of Darkness games. It's just laid out in such a nice way that you can make sense of it very easily. I think the one time I looked at the other versions, I was kind of like, there's a bit more here to digest, and I don't have the brain power to
That
want to do it.
that's fair. At least you have some experience with how that system at least semi runs now that you've played Werewolf for a bit too, because you've got
Yeah,
mine and another Werewolf game.
yeah, they're very fun. The one that I do with you is hilarious just because I play I play it in such a way that I'm like, I don't want to be here. Will you just let me go? And it's really interesting to see how how things have evolved from the game that you run to the game that I co-run, and how my bunch of players are tackling things in a very different way. That they're a lot of thinking about it and constantly asking help from ancestors and spirits and stuff like that, and that they do lots of rituals. There is about 2 rituals per episode so far.
Oh wow, yeah, I was gonna say how are the? I've been trying to inject the spiritual stuff, but other people just weren't going for it as much, or they think that it's exclusively for Thurges, as you've heard them
Yeah,
say, and I'm like, not really, but okay.
yeah. The I think they spent about 3 hours deciding who was going to be the alpha, and they did it all very civilized, sat down, talked about it. They put names in a hat, they drew them out, and then they were like, okay, why do you think person A should be, the alpha? Why do you think person B should be alpha? And they went about it and complimented each other on why they would be a good leader, and I was sitting there going, fight. Fight for it.
That's what happened
Uh,
with us. They became alphas, and the character who went evil that you were introduced to while she
Uh,
was evil, um, the Cora became the alpha first, and she's like, "I'm going to be the alpha. I'm the Arun. You know,
yeah.
fight me if you want." And so the Ragabash went, "Sure, I'll fight you for it," and it was just a thrash.
I expect
Like
nothing less.
Sam only rolls well when she is hitting other party members.
But if she's hitting an actual monster that's in front of her,
Like when she,
different story.
like when she's like, all right, attack this morning. I roll 12 dice, 1. All right, punch roll. I'm punch Roy. I'm rolling 12 dice, 11.
Oh, it's sod's law. It has to happen. It makes it funny because you're like, why can I not roll this good when I actually need to? Why is
Right.
it during the times that I don't want it to happen?
Yeah, I had it. That reminds me once of a D&D game where we had a cleric next to a gnomish rogue, and they were fighting goblins. And he rolled 3 ones in a row, which I then dictated meant that he had to roll against the. He had to roll an attack roll on the player next to him, which was the gnome, and then he rolled 2 nat 20s, and so he rolled maximum damage at level 1.
Oh
And so
no!
he just takes this gnome out, and the gnome rolls 1 failure, and everyone's like, okay, that's 1 failure. If you fail again, we'll use healing magic on you, because they're still in the middle of the fight. Rolls a 1, dies right there. And so he re-rolls up a roguish halfling, and then they get to the kobolds, and because kobolds, we were using the general assumption that kobolds and gnomes don't get along,
Yeah.
and they negotiated the kobolds to leaving, becoming good, and starting a civilization away from people so that they weren't bothered and attacked. We retroactively changed that story to the cleric getting divine, like a divine inspiration. So he just stands up and goes, I can see the future! Turns to the gnome, and the gnome's just like, what? I'm sorry! Smash! And that was how that story went.
Oh, beautiful. I love it when when there's PvP with players, because it generally, I'd say at least 75% of the time, results in death for a player.
Yes.
At least in my experience, it has.
We've done it to where at least they're the formal challenges in Werewolf, so someone steps and goes, whoa, stop.
Yeah, we've. I'm trying to think if they've. So obviously, my brand new fledglings from the Wednesday group have yet to do any form of combat because they're being very methodical about what they're doing. Also, still not quite 100% sure that they're actually Kindred yet. Whereas the group of Kindred I have on a Friday night, my goodness, they have exploded so many buildings and managed to cover it up to not break the masquerade that it shocks me. And then the werewolf lot on the Saturday just spend a lot of time talking about stuff. I'm like, where is the fighting? They did get into a bit of fighting the last 2 weeks because they were dealing with Black Spiral Dancer stuff. And I can't wait until they realise. Well, actually, no, they know they've only taken care of half of a pack and cleansed the cairn, but the other half are still out there. So that'll be real fun when they turn up.
Reoccurring NPCs and villains are the best.
They are, because the Saturday and Friday games are in the same universe. It means we can reuse a lot of our NPCs, which has been real fun so far. Because we've reused Pentex, just a little bit.
Okay. I was actually about to ask that. Where do you, like, for the vampire game, just show the mundanity of the Pentex subsidiaries? So, like, the vampires just go to an Atulli's, nothing supernatural happens there. They fill up at Endron gas stations, nothing bad, nothing supernatural from their perspectives, and just, like, have it permeate the whole setting.
Yeah, the Friday Kindred group, they've not had to deal with a massive amount of, like, Pentex being right in their face.
Mm-hmm.
What they have been dealing with is they've been dealing with Sabat, which have been trying to take over Birmingham City, because that's a reoccurring plot that has carried over from the charity live stream we did in November.
Okay.
So that got carried over into the Friday game. And they have been dealing with they've been dealing with Cthulhu, um, and they've also kind of opened Pandora's box and started Gehenna. So not only have they got Gehenna trying to happen, they have Cthulhu trying to happen. And they did have originally the whole thing started with they were supposed to be looking after a coffin which was supposed to belong to Lilith.
Oh,
And
Jesus.
then they lost it. So it turns out that whoever stole that lovely casket containing supposedly Lilith had been drawing blood from Lilith and putting it in energy drinks and then distributing it to the human population. So anyone who's been drinking these energy drinks have essentially been getting what could only be described as a point of rage, essentially, and just annihilating people to death, like around them.
Wow.
So they've had to deal with that, and then we were kind of like, okay, so that'll be that, and then they did more things, and it was like, okay, okay, right, okay. So now you have this to deal with. You have Kane, who is actually trying to stop Cthulhu because he wants Gehenna to happen. So he's trying to stop Cthulhu so he can have Gehenna, and they're trying to stop both of them.
This sounds like an anime.
It is pretty much like an anime. And last week, two of them kind of did some things which we had a checklist to say if they carry out this, this, and this, and do all the checkpoints, then they could possibly, become exalted. So one of them happened to become an abyssal exalted
Oh, Christ.
because he made a deal with the lady in the Vale of Tears. And then another one was off to go and look for a relic set of rosary beads in a church. And he thought that the person who was in the church, who was supposedly a priest, was a priest, and so kind of just thought, I'll just knock them out. I'll just get rid of them. And that didn't happen. It turned out it was the Archangel Michael, and they drank his blood. So we were like, well, we're gonna have to exalt you to a solar now because you've just drunk an angel's blood. Good job.
You definitely go a lot more gonzo than I do.
We say, yeah, we've got that whole mess going on, which, like I say, hopefully will be finishing up in the next couple of weeks, because there's not a great deal left for them to do. They've kind of got the things that they needed in order to stop Cthulhu. Hopefully they can do that and then just, I don't know, they can leave Gehenna to somebody else, I guess.
Yeah.
Whereas on the flip side, on the werewolf game, they've like I say, they've dealt with a kind of black spiral dancers. They've got some fae involved in this as well. So one of their I think he's a Furge. He was raised by changelings. So he's very much all about the fae and all that sort of stuff. He's all very much for fae, which is hilarious to watch when he interacts with the rest of his pack, because they're all sort of like, no, we don't like the fae. Stop involving the fae. They're not the answer to everything. And he seems to think otherwise. And they've had bombs going off in the city that they're in. Which they found out were to be Pentex. because it was really obvious when, you kill somebody and then you find a business card on them that says Pentex. And they've got a very different sort of thing in they don't really have the option to exalt. We're not hoping to push them in that direction, because once you've done it once, you don't want to do it again. It gets really boring and repetitive and really obvious. So we've kind of thrown them a massive curveball, and they have the souls. They're the reincarnation, this pack specifically. They're the reincarnation of some of the Knights of the Round Table that they found out last night.
Nice.
So, because I have a character that plays in both games as an NPC who is a Lunar Exalted, who happens to be the reincarnation of King Arthur. And they made a vow to Luna the other week saying that they would exterminate all the Black Spiral dancers. I was like, cool, we can work with this. So I jumped in as my NPC and sort of delivered the plot upon them, and I was like, so this is what's happening. You've said you're going to do this. I'm here to make sure that happens. By the way, this is where my Kern was, because we have this whole, again, backstory that goes back to the original vampire game that I actually played with the person that I co-run with, where we were saying that King Arthur was a Lunar Exalted, and that his Knights of the Round Table were White Howlers. And we gave them a vision last night to show them what happened when the White Howlers all turned into Black Spiral Dancers. So they're a little bit confused now. They're like, so are we White Howlers? And we're like, no, you're still your own individual tribes. That doesn't change. They can't come back. But they're like, okay, cool. What do we do now? I'm like, right, well, we'll sort that next time.
Yeah.
So we finished the game, and they were just kind of sat there going, what have you done to us? Right, this has been planned since the beginning.
I love when those moments happen.
Yeah, they got real excited afterwards. After the sort of confusion wore away, they were real excited, and they were like, oh my god, right. And then they were like looking up the coat of arms for each one of their supposed reincarnated souls. We gave the Furge, who is all very much for the changelings, we gave him Merlin's staff because he does all of the rituals. So he was a very happy person.
Very nice.
So I'm really excited to see how they progress. And then I'm like super excited to see how my brand new fledglings on a Wednesday actually go ahead in that story. And again, we're reusing some of the characters because we like to keep it all still within the same universe. Because it just makes it easier that we're not having to come up with millions of characters and then getting lost, because there's so many vampire and werewolf games that go on in our sort of like group, that we don't want to lose track of which characters appear in which game. So we've made it in such a way that it's all very much the same universe, but maybe not the same timeline. Okay,
yeah, I was gonna say how you keep that straight, because actually this game you guys are in is I've reused, because I built the Sept of the Green from the ground up. Yeah. When I did that, mostly because I didn't have Rage Across New York at the time, nor did I really look at the Sept of the Green too much in the back of the second edition Werewolf book, because I was using 20th at the time, and I just didn't know, or really I just forgot that the Sept of the Green was back there, so I built it from the ground up, and so all those characters made a reappearance in this game. And actually, with Brennan, he comes back occasionally and plays an NPC version of his character from the last game at a snapshot of his life, but with a different timeline slightly, to where they're not the main characters anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've done, because it makes life so much easier.
Yes.
Yeah, the Wednesday fledglings, their story continues a year after the game that I played. So theirs is a direct continuation of that story, whereas the Friday and Saturday group, the timeline sort of spins off quite early on in that story with those characters. So like my character and my co-pilot's character, they exist, but not to the point where they were at the end of the story. They're like sort of, I'd say maybe halfway point in the story. So if I looked at the timeline, I've got one group that is right the way at the end and continuing that one timeline, and then the Friday Saturday group where they get sort of like halfway into the timeline and then it splits off, and that's their own timeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that a lot. You've already basically answered this question with your adding exalteds and things like that into your game, but I was going to say, how much of the meta plot or the original meta plot do you pick and choose from, and which parts do you like to adhere to, and which parts do you just kind of throw out the window?
Meta plot wise, we try to keep it pretty much on point with the plot. So when we had the Exalted introduced in the original game, our game runner pretty much kept it to the whole point of, you had the Solars, you had the Lunars, then you had the Fall and everything, and having the Dragon Blooded doing the Wild Hunt, and having them locked away in the Jade prison, and then the whole thing with the Abyssals and the Sidereals. We tried to keep it really on point with what had been written in the World of Darkness, sort of like history. And we kind of kept it again the same when we had the introduction of the Black Spiral Dancers, and the White Howlers don't really exist anymore because they've been wiped out because they're Black Spiral Dancers sort of thing. And again with the Kindred, everything has kind of happened as it has been written again. There are like a slight few changes, but nothing major. Like, we haven't turned around and said one of the antediluvians still exists, for example, or anything like that.
Okay.
If it's written that they don't exist, then we try not to put them in.
Okay.
Just to try and keep a steady stream for storytelling purposes.
That makes sense. Yeah, because the current game you're in, there is a White Howler now, or maybe he's getting trained.
He's getting trained. We do have one White Howler that exists in the cross universe of our game, but he doesn't come up that often, I'd say. Although, no, actually, yeah, he hasn't really come up that much. He appears here and there occasionally, but he's not a reoccurring character that happens that often compared to some of the NPCs that they interact with.
Yeah. The one in ours is he is alive and not a spiral as a direct cause of Fomori's Bane getting involved, so that was a nice one. There was also a clever use of mind speak in that one. So how do you, is there any kind of concerns? Do you keep notes, since there's a lot of this expanded universe stuff that you're doing, where you're afraid something major happens to the NPC in one timeline that is kind of impossible to happen in the other, and how do you keep those separate in your notes and in your mind? Because I could see myself at least mixing things up.
Yeah, I have I have a shelf of notebooks, and I kind of have them separated out. I have one book which is specifically to do with Vampire the Masquerade stuff, and that's kind of split into different sections so that I can make small notes of things that have happened. But we don't really have a lot of the NPCs where one thing has happened that couldn't happen in another time or place. Because we've got the slight break in the original timeline, we've made it in such a way that the Gehenna that happened in the main timeline, which was caused by my character and another character, because our game master was a freaking genius and took the Book of Nods and really did put it perfectly, word for word, what was going to happen, and how it was going to happen. And I was just like, there's no way that can happen. But he managed to make it work in such a way that we got the Gehenna to happen, even though we tried not to. But because we have the separate timeline and the way that it's currently going with that bunch of Kindred dealing with Cthulhu and possible Gehenna, we just kind of make a note to say that, okay, you know, this is how it's going to happen. There is no actual way for certain NPCs from the other timeline to not have what happened to them happen, or vice versa, in the new timeline. We just try to make a very brief note to say, make sure this thing doesn't happen, and if it looks like it's going to happen, we kind of try to steer it ever so slightly, but not to the point where we're saying to a player, no, you can't do that.
Okay.
I was like looking at my notebooks there, like, yeah, that's right, I do have the one. I have a very large shelf of notebooks, and suddenly got real confused. I was like, why can I say more than one of that book? But I really need to label them.
That brings me to the next question then. How do you take notes for your games? What do you do? What do you prioritize? How do you plan for your games?
Oh boy. I write plot and then immediately throw it in the bin about 5 minutes later. Because players are players, and I've been dealing with writing LARP plot for about 4 years now, where we write stuff and then quite literally at the game, the player will do something and we're like, well, we didn't expect that to happen, so now we have to completely rewrite everything, to the point where in one game, we actually had to rewrite history because of something a player did.
Oh.
So if I'm writing the plot, I try to keep a vague idea of what I want them to try and accomplish, the kind of places I want them to go with a story. But I leave it very open-ended for them to be able to make their own decisions. And I'm very good at improvising on the spot with, okay, I wasn't expecting you to do that, but I can work with it. And being able to give them enough of a story from their actions. It also really helps if you know your players. Because all of my players are really good long-term friends, I can anticipate a lot of the time what they're going to do. There are possibly a handful of times where they have thrown me a curveball, and I've gone, I did not expect that or foresee that. So I will give them, like, I'll say, you know, give me a couple of minutes. I'm just gonna delve into the book of notes and just see if I've potentially prepared something in the worst case scenario. But I've gotten very used to having these players do the exact sort of thing I would expect them to do. So I've gotten very used to the werewolf group spending a lot of time talking about something rather than fighting something. So when they actually take violence as the option, it's like, oh, okay, not expecting that one, but I have something planned just on the off chance. It's the same with the Kindred lot. I'm always expecting them to blow something up because that's their answer to everything. So there's little notes everywhere, and each character has their own little notes to say that they might want to do this sort of thing, or they might want to do this sort of thing. And it's almost like having a hierarchy and just having a bunch of lines that go down saying, well, if they do this, then this is going to happen. But if they do this, this is going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, my go-to strategy now, and I've said it before on here, is just I write the end state of if they don't get involved,
Yeah.
and then just kind of adjust from there.
Yep. We had it for the Friday lot that if they didn't get all the relics and craft the bell, that it would then become the werewolf group on a Saturday's problem. So they'd still have to deal with it, but they would either be Kindred or Guru. So in the end of the day, they don't get away with it because it is the exact same universe, and it is happening at the exact same time. They're just in different cities.
Got it. Speaking of improvisation, then, do you think that is a skill that can only be gained through practice, or do you have any sort of advice for anyone listening as to how to improve their improvisation skills for being a GM?
Ooh, that's a good one. Improv is definitely a really useful thing to have if you are running any form of tabletop game. Because, like I've said before, you can't always guarantee that a player is going to follow the story that you have wrote. You always have to be prepared to know that there is always going to be maybe one or two players who divulge from the path that you want them to take. And you can't turn around and say, no, you can't do that, because that's a terrible thing for a GM to do. You have to give them the freedom to be able to make their own choices. So by having the ability to do the improv, you're opening up the world for your players, and you'll find that your players are more interactive and engaged and thankful that you've allowed them to do something. Um, I got a lot of my improv skills from years of doing theatre and drama, and because I've spent about at least a decade as a cosplayer and a LARPer, where there's no script. You just kind of have to go off and act how you want to act, and reactively act towards things that are happening in front of you. I would say the best thing to do to practice that sort of thing is see if you can find like local Amdram societies, local theatre groups. I know right now it's a bit difficult with the current situation in the world, but being able to go and gain some performance skills can really help with being able to tell a story. Also, doing some creative writing can help as well. If you can write a story, then you're halfway there to being a DM. Being able to prepare a world for people, and being able to change it quickly on the fly, are the things that really do make a good DM. You don't need to know the rules 100%, because everybody who runs games will play them slightly different, and you'll have your own house rules, so you don't have to worry about being perfect with the rules. But if you don't have a great story and you can't react quickly when a player does something that you weren't expecting, it can really throw the game off. It can make it so your players don't quite feel like they're actually part of the game. And for a lot of tabletop players, immersing yourself in that world is a huge thing. It's an escape for a lot of people. So if you can't produce that world for them, that for them to believe in, then you're not doing a very good job of being a games master.
All right. That leads to the next question. You touched upon it a little bit in your last answer, but how do you think playing in LARPs has affected your playstyle at the table as a GM and a player?
Oh boy, player-wise, for LARPing, if I get to physically be at a table with people, they will realize that I will, majority of the time, try and put some kit on to pretend that I'm that character. Which I think really helps get you in the mindset of a character. I also tend to put on, if I can, I try to put on an accent so that I can again believe that I'm more of that character. Um, the LARPing is basically just playing a tabletop game, but you're actually out in the public doing it. Well, I say in the public, you're out on a field or in a forest, pretending to do it, and you also not having to roll dice. Which would be really interesting now that I come to think of it, if you involved dice in an actual LARP game. Be a bit long-winded when it came to combat, but the LARPing definitely has helped for a a point of view of becoming a character. Um, but I'd say that equally doing a lot of drama and theatre as a kid also helped, because I'm very used to sort of almost dropping who I am as a person and then becoming someone else. So I have characters who are very upbeat and bubbly and happy-go-lucky and will run towards anyone and shake their hand. Well, I have characters who are very scared and don't want to do any fighting and run away from the fights. And then I have like characters who are very angry all the time and don't trust anyone. And they're all sort of characters that I've picked up from doing LARP games.
Okay.
In the flip side of how has it helped with me being a storyteller and stuff, the actual playing LARP games hasn't helped me so much, but the running of LARP games has, because I've had to write the plot and obviously what sort of items they might find in the game. Because I run, well, I help run rather than I solo run, because that would be ridiculous. But because I help run a medium-sized system with about 50 players, we give them all personal downtime responses. And we try to, when we're actually at the game, we try to interact with each and every one of them personally so that they get out of the game what they want to achieve as their characters. And that requires, again, a lot of being able to just think rapidly on the spot of how would you respond to this person asking a question. The story writing for it, because it's about, how many years we've been running now? 4 years, I think we've been running. The story was kind of wrote right at the beginning, and then every game that's happened, whatever the players have done has affected that story. So bit by bit, we've taken bits out and gone, well, this is how the players have dealt with it. So this is how it's going to go. And as I mentioned previously, at one event, they rewrote history. And so we actually rewrote the history. And a nation that didn't exist in the previous timeline then existed again because of something they did in the past. So it's one of those things where, again, you have to be reactive to what your players are doing. And that's a skill that has really helped with doing the tabletop games, because players are players and they will ruin your plot within 5 minutes. It is guaranteed and proven to happen time and time again.
Absolutely. The current group was getting pretty easy to predict. I did throw in the new curveballs, so to speak, with you three who joined in. Which has been interesting. Which has been interesting. How do you think the UK's gaming culture differs from the US's gaming culture, at least from what you've experienced in my game, what you've probably seen on Twitch and YouTube?
Yeah, the main point is when we run games, they're all set in Britain. They're very rarely set in anywhere else, and vice versa. I've noticed that a lot of Americans running games will run them in their home state because that's what they know. it's very easy to run a game in a place that you know, because you can describe it a lot easier. For us, if we were trying to run a game that was set somewhere in America, oh boy, I haven't got a clue. Short of the basics,
the trees are enormous. Everything's big. Your yard is massive.
I wouldn't be able to say, right, well, it's on this street. Because I don't know. I'd have to get a Google map up and then zoom right in and go, okay, you're here, and then send it to them. Whereas if obviously we run games, it's a lot easier for us to do them in our hometowns, because we can describe them a lot better, and then your players will also know where they are game-wise, so they can plan how they're going to act a bit better. Aside from that, I think I've noticed that some, for example, some Americans who stream Vampire the Masquerade tend to be a lot darker, but that could just be me. Whilst it's called a world of darkness, there are some levels of darkness that we do not like to plummet into. A lot of our games, because they're played by British people, you'll find that the characters are very stereotypical British people.
Oh.
If you haven't guessed by my tea drinking and bacon eating in your game. Other than that, I can't say that I've noticed a big difference. Everyone obviously sticks to sort of the same ideas when it comes to games. The only thing that obviously I could say different is I find it real shocking if I was playing, for example, a werewolf game, and suddenly you threw upon me the fact that, we were Knights of the Round Table. I find it real strange that you put an Arthurian legend in there, considering it's a British thing more than anything. So I think it just varies on the location. But game-wise, and mechanics, I'd say everyone tends to be the same.
Okay, that's fair. Actually, fun fact: the previous werewolf campaign I did before this one was not in my home state. We did it in New York City the whole time. That was our home sept.
Yeah, but it was still America.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
I think part of that was just Werewolf, especially before 20th came out, was very very American centric.
Yeah. I found that a lot of the games that do get put up on YouTube or on Twitch do tend to be very American based. But that's almost like saying a lot of movies tend to be American based. It's just one of those things that happens, really.
That's fair. That's completely fair. Excuse me. How do you handle, I guess, the diversity of your worlds, if you do, or is that something you consciously attempt to inject into your games?
Diversity-wise, I'm trying to think if we've had any major issues with diversity. I don't think we have. We've For example, one of our characters on the Wednesday game is a person of colour, which we kind of ummed and ahed about because of the whole Black Lives Matter campaign that's going on. We didn't want it to come across in the wrong way, but when we sat down and discussed the character and how we thought we'd envision the character, it just made sense. And I said to the player, it's up to you if you want to change their design. But honestly, I think changing that character to be another white character would actually be more harmful. I think it's nice to show that just because you are a white person or a person of color doesn't mean you can't play another person of color or a white character or a transgender character, a gay character, or anything like that. Because, we're all human at the end of the day, and as long as we're not doing it in a disrespectful way, as long as we're not showing any maliciousness with it, I think it's nice to celebrate that we can be anything we want to be in these games. We have in an upcoming Vampire the Masquerade game that we're going to be playing on the Friday once the current one is finished. One of our characters is a transgender gangrel. And that's because the person who is playing them is transgender, and they wanted to play a transgender character. And likewise, we've had characters who are gay characters, but not necessarily that the person playing them is gay. They just want to represent a different diversity. You know, they want to be able to celebrate that not everything is black and white, so to speak. You know, we don't all have to be one thing. This is a creative place, and it's a safe place, especially when we're at the table. Everything that happens, if something is going to happen that possibly someone's not comfortable with, we discuss it. Very similar how you asked me and you asked the rest of the players, was there anything that we did not want to happen? And, you know, you made a note of that. It's the same with, you know, are you okay with us having characters in that represent a certain dynamic? As long as you respect that and respect the players, I think it's nice to have that sort of representation.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Things I need to get better about is sometimes explicitly saying it, though, because especially in America, the default assumption is white. Mm-hmm. And like for some characters, it's significantly more obvious than others. Like Teresa Fate Dancer Valdez is of Native Hispanic origin, and Regender is of Indian descent. But things that I haven't made explicit, but in my mind I had already made, and I just simply hadn't said them out loud, is most of the Glasswalkers in the Sept of the Steel Mountain are Black Americans, actually. And most of the Stargazers come from a variety of Asian cultures. Yeah.
It's one of those. You either announce it or you don't announce it. But it is nice to be able to, like I say, represent everyone, and not just do the standard straight white characters.
Exactly.
It's the same in the LARP community. It's the same in the cosplay community. You can't turn around and tell somebody that they can't play or they can't cosplay a certain character because that character is white and you're Asian, for example.
Yes.
So what? And that in theory should ring true for tabletop. Just because you are a person of color doesn't mean you can't play a bisexual, white person.
Absolutely. There's a great article. I posted it to the Facebook page, and I should dig it up again at some point and post it periodically. It's an article of how to play other races respectfully.
Yes. Yep. Because I think I've run into my fair share of people who have played races, for example, and it's very insulting. And I've had to actually, one of them was in one of the LARP games I run, and I actually had to turn around and go, please make a new character because you are being very disrespectful to this, race of people, essentially. And they did. They made a new character, and I was like, please never do that again. If you do it again in this game, you are banned. Yeah.
And I think at least a lot of people, myself included, in our past, we have made unfortunate caricatures, witting or unwitting. I like to think unwitting most of the times, but, the growing out of that is something that needs to be like, hey, look, just because you did it in the past doesn't mean you can't play a person of color in the future, but you need to be aware of those biases and you need to do it right this time.
Absolutely. I think that sort of harkens back to, for example, Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons, obviously looking at a lot of their races and making changes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad that they're finally addressing it, though. Twitter has been kind of going off on the two creators that are left, the two creators who aren't Mike Merles, about it.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's things that were deemed acceptable, back in the day, obviously aren't acceptable. I mean, they weren't really acceptable back in the day, but they weren't frowned upon as much. It's like the whole thing with I'm not sure if you guys are aware of it in America, but we had the whole issue with they took Little Britain off Netflix because the creators and performers in that represented, I think it was some people of color in a very not nice comical way, shall we say.
Yeah, no, I
But
understand. It's like WB pulling Gone with the Wind from HBO Max just to put a contextual explanation at the beginning.
unfortunately, we can't go back in time and change pre-recorded films and programs that might be offensive in this day and age.
I saw a really interesting one, at least regarding Gone with the Wind, is it was actually offensive in its age as well. There were people of color who protested it because they had the good old days of slavery sort of vibe about it, but because the media didn't focus on those voices, that kind of got jumbled in history. And I hope the WB explanation actually points to that as well.
Yeah, it's a lot easier now for people to protest and get their point across with the internet and all the forms of social media that we have. It's very easy now to say that we don't like something, whereas back in the day, you had letters. That was the extent you could do a protest. You could write to the studio, for example, the TV production company, and say, "We don't approve." But
Yeah,
that would be it. And you wouldn't know about it. You wouldn't know that somebody is protesting something. Whereas now, you know about it instantly. If there is a big protest happening, you know because it is everywhere.
exactly. So, I'm getting close, but I wanted to ask a couple more werewolf questions. Favorite tribe to storytell and what favorite tribe to play?
Ooh, favorite favorite to play, clearly Fiona. Not that I'm biased or anything. And I'd say favorite to storytell for. Ooh boy, Red Talon.
I'm with you on that. That's my favorite as well.
I really like Red Talon, and they're one of the ones that I'm kind of for the next time that I get to play a werewolf game. They're one of the ones I'm looking to play.
Very cool. So we'll go with the big question now, the final question. If money, time, resources, players was not an issue, what would be your dream game to run?
Ooh, my dream game to run. Real difficult when I have my finger in so many pies. Um, I would love to run if all of those things were not an issue. I would love to run a week-long Vampire the Masquerade game and do the Week of Nightmares.
Nice. That
If
does
I
sound like
if,
fun.
if I could have players and a place to do it in, and for example, we could all get paid um, annual leave for a week so that nobody was actually missing out on work. I would run the Week of Nightmares for an entire actual week, and then do day by day what is happening, and try and run it for as long as possible with basically just having the break to go to bed for like 7 to 8 hours. That would definitely be the dream.
That shit. I might have a new dream. Though I think currently it's still Crisis on Infinite Games.
Ooh, that is also a good one. Damn.
Yeah. Well, we're towards the end of the recording here, so for myself and Brennan, who wasn't here, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you, Jade, for showing up.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute blast.
Is there any place on social media that people should know where to find you?
You can find my Twitter, which is under Emrys Costumes, I believe, on the Twitters. I'm now just double checking. Yes, I'm right. So it's Emrys Costumes on Twitter. And then for Twitch, I have my own personal channel, which is Emrys Plays, and the big group that I'm part of for the tabletopping, which is HeavyWaiteGaming.
Perfect. All right, and with that, you can find us on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts. We have a Facebook group, but you will never find me on Twitter. Unlike Jade, I find it a cesspool. Thank you. Bye.